Okay, welcome to Painting Foods with Food Colour. So today we're going to paint a red cabbage, which is obviously much more a mixture of violet and purple and pinks. But we're going to use the dye that came off this after I boiled the other half of it. And what I got was a very bluey colour. So I added a little bit of beetroot into the mix when I was boiling it and then simmering. So you boil first, then you simmer for about an hour to give it a more sort of pinky tone. So in the red cabbage, you'll see violets and purples. Are they the same colour? No, they're not. People mix them up. Violet on the colour wheel is heading towards the blue, and purple is a colour which is mixed with blue and red. So it's heading towards the reds. So you really do need to think of them as two separate colours. But this has violet and purple in it. So we're going to use a sort of halfway colour between the two. And then I can also add in some watercolour from the pans that I have too to get in this gorgeous sort of pink. I could use alizarin crimson or maybe a bit of rose madder. Okay, so let's get started. I'll explain how I made the colour first. So the first thing I want to do is, because this is a complex, incredibly complex thing to paint, really, if you think about it. I mean, all these sort of like incredible little channels and burrows, and it's got an amazing texture and depth, actually. You can see right into these holes here. And the color variation is absolutely beautiful. And then you've got this sort of tree, this off-white tree which is the core coming through everything. It's really beautiful. It's almost like an Edvard Munch vegetable. It really is a wonderful, wonderful thing to paint. But attempting to paint it without any drawing whatsoever is pretty brave. And I like the idea of drawing first, very gently with an HB or a B or a 2B pencil, whatever you feel most comfortable with. However, time is short in life, and I don't really want to be doing this photographically realistically. I'm just not interested in that. I'm interested in giving the sense of all of these shapes, because to actually honor those shapes and be dedicated exactly to how they are would take many, many hours. So I don't have time for that, and I'm sure you don't. So we're going to do an approximation of this with a drawing or a sketch first, and then we're going to go in for the detail with the painting. And we're going to use the food colouring that came from this, from beetroot, and we're also going to combine that with my watercolour pans as well. So let's make a drawing first. So the first thing to decide is, are you going to have your paper landscape or portrait format? And because it's quite long and slim, it's like a sort of ovoid, I'm going to work with a portrait format. And that way I can sort of have nice composition with it fitting in quite nicely. I'm going to work quite large. And what I'm going to do first of all is, using the side of my pencil, I'm just going to get a general feel for the shape of this. Very, very general feel for the shape. I'm holding it in my hand as I do it because it makes it a lot easier. And then I come down into this bit at the bottom. Very, very rough, very, very loose. Almost looks like a sort of bit deflated balloon. Very, very loose. There's nothing wrong with just getting a general feeling of what you're drawing. So now what I'm going to do is find where that sort of core is, because that's my starting point. Why is it my starting point? Well, because whatever makes life easier, use that as your starting point. And by doing that, I've realized I haven't got quite enough width here, so I might bring that out. Okay, very, very rough. I've realized now by doing that that I need to bring this in a bit closer down here and just start to get in those shapes. That's quite nice, that comes in there. Almost sort of embryonic shapes in here. That one's a bit more of an attitude over here. Okay, I'm coming in like that. And then there's this really beautiful piece here, which looks almost like a gloved hand, which is holding that up. So I'm going to use that as a, like that there, that's nice. And that helps guide me to find the other pieces. Like that. So just generally working your way around the whole cabbage. And as I said, life's too short to be too indebted to exactly what's in front of you. Oh, there's a beautiful shape here. You can see that. That's gorgeous. Oh, I love that. That's gorgeous. They like unfurled sort of ribbons. Beautiful. So really enjoy it as you're going round, but don't get too bogged down in being totally indebted to it. And I'm actually going to rub back this drawing afterwards. I'm doing it very rough because I don't want to be too enslaved to this. I want to try and enjoy it and not feel like, oh, I haven't done it right because that shape's not right. Think of it as like creating a sculptural version or your version of this. Okay, just enjoy. I'll cut there and then I'll come back to it when I finish drawing. Right. Okay, so that's as much detail as I'm going to do. Now what I'm going to do is rub it back slightly. And the reason I'm doing this is because I don't want all of that pencil to come through my painting. Some people like that, but I don't want to do that. So I'm rubbing back the drawing a bit so that I've got a sort of ghost-like quality underneath. Now you can hear a lot of traffic. It's because I'm by an open window to get some air in, and we've got a very busy road here, so it's quite trafficy. Living in the cosmopolitan London, that's what it is. Okay, so that will do for now. Tip it up, give my desk a blow like that. Okay, so I am ready now to begin my painting. So here's my beautiful liquid colour. It's very rich. I don't know if you can see that when it sort of comes off the side of the glass. It's really beautiful, and it makes you wonder why you buy your own paints, although of course they have binder in. So that's a different matter. But we're just using it in a very watery state. But we are going to combine it with watercolour paints as well, of course. So first of all, I'm going to dampen the whole page. The reason I'm dampening the whole page is because the paper has got size in it, which is almost like a sort of, it's like a sort of gelatine-based preservative that goes into the paper, and it allows the paper to be able to cope with the amount of water that goes on it. However, if you don't coat the whole page with water at one time, and I'm not soaking it, I'm just doing it quite glossy, you tend to get buckling on the paper. So if I was just to treat this area with water, it would slightly buckle because it would stretch just in the part where the water is. So I'm just quite roughly putting on some water and sort of dampening the page. And then I'm going to let that sink in. And I'm also going to help it by, you can see it's already beginning to buckle. I'm going to push it back the other way a bit, just so you get a bit more control over it, just bending it back into place. Okay, so looking back at the red cabbage, there isn't really much colour here of this purpley, violety colour. So I don't really need anything here, but I do want a tiny, tiny amount of colour there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use a tiny wash of my dye that I've made all over. Can you see how beautiful that is? Look at that. Oh, it's just wonderful to have made your own paints. Now it's quite diluted, as you can see, but just the feeling of painting something with the very dye that comes from it is really rather wonderful. So I'm doing an overall wash of this pigment that I've created, the dye from the cabbage. And then what I'm going to do is quickly, using a clean damp brush, same brush but clean, I'm going to lift off the colour in those areas. Now, why bother with having done that? It just gives a tiny halo of colour. That's the reason I've done it. Okay, it just gives a tiny halo of colour, takes the raw whiteness away, and just gives us something to work with. So now we've got this undercoat here. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to get a smaller brush because this is a 1/4 inch flat brush. I'm going to get a smaller brush and I'm going to put some yellow ochre down here because if you look at the cabbage, it is quite like yellow ochre there. Now, I suppose I could have made my own yellow ochre. Not quite sure what from, maybe from nutmeg and ginger, I'm not quite sure, but anyway, I'll look into that. I'm going to put a tiny bit of yellow ochre down on the stem, down at the bottom, down here, just a little bit down there, like that, up into here, a little bit in there, just to take the edge off. Keep that in there like that, very gently. And then once again, clean damp brush, lift off. You have to be careful when you're lifting off. You don't rub the paper too much because it can get damaged. But that's just enough to take the edge off, to give it a little bit of a tint of colour, but not too much. So I'll just show you that. Okay, that's enough for there. I can't see much yellow ochre, a tiny bit at the top. I might do a tiny bit at the top. Up here, I can see a bit where it started to go a bit off. There's a little bit of colour up there. Oops. I might do a little bit up here, just sort of patches of it. A few patches of it around. Now, again, don't forget, you're not indebted to making this perfect. You're just enjoying getting the sense of a red cabbage. We're not interested in, well, I'm not interested in photographic realism. You may as well take a photo as far as I'm concerned. Oh, I've noticed there's quite a lot of browning up here on the edge. So I'm going to put that in. I'm going a bit darker now. I'm using a tiny bit of umber with that because actually looking closely at that, look, quite a lot of brown on that edge. So I've gone a bit darker in there. And then I've noticed I can use that darker bit of colour for in the gap here and a little bit more up there. I'm just starting to lay the foundation very gently still. Okay, can I see anywhere else I can use that colour? I can go a bit darker around there. Not really, I think that's probably it. That's it, I think. Yep, that's it. Right, now I'm into the light purpley colours or the, in fact, I'm going to go for the pinks first. Now, I don't have a pink that I've made, so I'm going to use an alizarin crimson. Now, I had some old red in under there. I don't know if you can see because it's a dirty palette, but I'm going to use that. I'm mixing it all in. And I've got an alizarin crimson. That I'm going to add into it. So it gives it that nice rich colour. So that's red that was left over and some alizarin crimson. And because we're working from light to dark, I can now go in with the pinky colour because that's obviously lighter than the purples and the violets of the red cabbage. So now I'm going to go in to those areas that I can see are a bit more pink. And it's an undercoat. Don't forget it's an undercoat. So I'm going to go in here, just a little bit in there. And I'm going to go in and attack some of these other places. And this is all an undercoat. So I'm going in where the purples and violets are going to go. I'm going into those in-between bits, of the red cabbage. So wherever you can see a darkness is where I'm going because I want to give it a nice pink underlay. If you can see any what we call blooming, where the paper's a bit damp and it starts to feather out, that's absolutely fine. Allow it to do that. Don't worry about that. I'm using the tip of my brush so that I can get some nice little scrolly effects. So I've made a start, and that's just with the alizarin crimson mixed in with a bit of the red that I had left over on my pan. And I've just started to sort of tuck into it, started to sort of find some nice shapes that I liked. I put a little bit of extra pink down here. I've blocked in a bit more pink here. I've used the side of the brush at the top here to get a nice effect, the side of the brush around here. This is just an undercoat, so this is not the finished article whatsoever. The brush I've got is okay. It's a size 6, but I might go down to a size 4 because it's not such a great quality brush and it won't point. It won't go into a nice point, which is a bit annoying. So I might go down to a size 4 brush. And the next thing we're going to do is go in with the purples, which are the more red, the red violet, if you like. What am I describing it? It's sort of like a more red than blue. So as I've got this pink and I don't like wasting paint, I may as well use this as a base. And I'm going to put in some ultramarine into that. So I get a sort of violet, and then I'm going to add in some red. So it becomes more purple. Okay, I've got my purple. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add in some extra layer over this with the slightly smaller brush. So I want to get into some of those shadows. I'm going in, you can see it's slightly darker now. Can you see that? So I'm going in with the smaller brush, with the tip, and going in over the top. I'm not covering all of it. This is the secret, the handy tip. Don't cover everything. Allow the colour beneath to blend or peek through, poke through, if you like. You don't want to cover everything. You just want to put it across like that. Okay, so I'm going to cut there and then come back to this when I'm done. Okay, so once you've got the pinkiness down, you've got the purple down, you're now ready for the kill. You're ready for the very dark, beautiful violet. Okay, so with violet, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix my violet from my pan with the beautiful, gorgeous liquid that we've made. I'm going to mix them together so that I get a thicker consistency. So I'm going to clean off a bit of my palette because I don't want that on there anymore. Sometimes watercolor can go a bit grainy, a bit granulate, what they call granulated. So look at that color. That's the color I made from the cabbage and the beetroot. That is just beautiful. But I'm going to give it a helping hand and I'm going to mix in some violet. Can you see? Mix in a little bit more violet and look at that color. Oh, call that the Leo violet. I think that's beautiful. Okay, so we're going to use the dye that we've made plus the violet from the pan, and that is just beautiful. Okay, so as always, you want a sort of single cream consistency. Okay, so we've got our colour, and now we're going to go in, and now we have to use a smaller brush. So I'm going for I'm going to use my 4 still, but you could use a 4 or even a 2. And now we're going to go in and actually start to put the detail in. This is where the detail comes. So now we can be really noticing where the detail is and go in on top. It's really more like drawing really at this stage. You can see how much detail we've got to put in. It's got to be very precise. Well, when I say precise, I don't mean you've got to get it exactly like the look of the cabbage, but just try and have a lot of control over this colour now. And as I say, always try not to register everything perfectly, allow it to be misregistered with the colour underneath. Don't make it like cover everything that's underneath. And just go across all of the areas to get those really lovely, rich, dark bits in. And what will happen is the colours that you've placed underneath as a foundation will sort of peek through what you're doing on top. That's why you mustn't cover everything all over what you've done with the purple. You want it to come through a bit. Okay, right. So I've put in all the pinky colour, I've put in the purple colour, starting to get more depth. I've got myself a nice, one of my favourite little two brushes. You'll find that you find certain brushes your favourites and others you're not. And I don't know why this one, because it's not actually a very posh one. It's just major brushes. But I like the quality of it. And I've mixed myself a violet, which is the bluey colour, and I've put in some of my cabbage dye that I made, and I've added in some Prussian blue, which is that incredibly intense blue. And you can see the colour I've got, hopefully. It's a sort of, violet with blue and a bit of pink in. And now I'm going to go in for the kill. You see how much darker that is. That's much darker. And now it means I can really get that depth in that I'm looking for. And that's what I'm doing now. So I'm going back in, finding those dark pockets of the deep bluey violet and going in for those with a two brush. Don't forget to always check the thing you're actually painting so that you can get reference from looking at it, actually looking at it. Then back in with my brush and there. What we're actually doing is called glazing. In other words, we're layering one colour over another colour, but we have to wait till the colour's dry before we do that. Otherwise, it's not glazing, that's just mixing. Okay, so I've done all of those dark patches, and now what I've noticed that as the cabbage is sort of fading, where it's going off, basically, you can see some tinges of colour in the stem here. So I'm going to add those in. I'm going to put a little bit of pink into the mix that I've got here, alizarin crimson rather, and get a tiny sort of slightly blurred effect of colour on there. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to re-wet the sort of stem area and just drop in a bit of that colour along the side, just a bit, so it sort of seeps in a bit like that, just so I get a slightly sort of feathered or bloomed area like that. Same for each one. Just drop in a bit of that colour, and you can always lift off a bit if it goes a bit too much, like that. And then what I might do is just lift off some of it so it's not quite so strong. Clean damp brush, lifting off a bit. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going to add a little bit more into these pockets because some of them need a bit more. And that's using the same colour I just used for the stalk, the stem rather. May as well use that up, going back in, getting a bit stronger in some of these areas to give a bit more depth. And I'll just tweak it all over. And then once I've done that, I will probably stop painting and go back into using, once it's dry, using some colouring pencils. Now, purist watercolourists probably would not, but I think, like Turner, who used a variety of media, which was at his disposal, to create what he wanted, that's what I'm doing too. I'm using a variety of media. You don't have to be so purist about watercolour at all. So I'm just adding some stronger, thicker deeper pockets around the cabbage where I can see them, where I might have missed them a bit, just to get a bit more depth. So that's it for me for now. I would not be doing any more with watercolour painting, but I will now move on to colouring pencils to give it a bit of depth, and graphite pencils too. Graphite just means normal pencil. So this is as far as I go with this. In terms of painting, sometimes you can just paint too much. You don't need any more paint. That's enough now. And we're going to add in colouring pencils. Okay, so I'm going to go back in with my colouring pencil. I'm going to go back in with a blue. I'm just going to pick out certain areas to give it a bit more depth, the bluiness. Nice sharp pencil, little tiny fragments here and there. Not too many, just a bit all over. And then I'm going to find a nice violet to pick out the rest of it. So I'm going to go back in now with the violet. So carry on adding in the violet back in with the colouring pencil, just so you get some nice deep crevices in this. So there you have it. There's my cabbage painted with food dye made from cabbages and beetroots, watercolour paints, colouring pencils, and drawing pencils. And there you go. Red cabbage with food dye.